In ancient times, the Nile Valley was a particularly lush and fertile land. The annual flooding of the Nile brought valuable nutrients to the valley, meaning the area was perfect for agriculture. It is not surprising, then, that this was the setting for flourishing ancient cultures. South of Egypt, another civilization rose and prospered, the Nubians. The Nubians were largely dismissed by Western archaeologists for a large part of the 19th century. But modern historians are now trying to rectify this gross oversight. If you'd like to know more, keep watching as we count down 5 mysteries about ancient Nubia. Number 5. Why is ancient Nubia not as famous as ancient Egypt? Stories of ancient Egypt have permeated our popular culture since the Victorian era, and most of us likely have learned about the land of pharaohs and pyramids in school. However, tales of Nubia are decidedly absent until the latter half of the 19th century. But why? Well, the short answer, unfortunately, is racist misconceptions. Archaeologists uncovering Nubian artifacts just did not believe that a black culture could be as advanced as the supposedly fairer-skinned Egyptians. The long answer is slightly more complicated, and the ancient Egyptians actually contributed to this historical cover-up. After Nubia lost control of Egypt, the Egyptians spread negative propaganda about their former rulers. Most notably, Egyptian art from the post-Nubian era depicts black-skinned Nubians in submissive roles. Of course, this fit right in with the colonial attitudes of Western archaeologists in the Victorian era. In today's world, racial tension is so common, it is easy to forget the world wasn't always so obsessed with skin color. In fact, ancient Egypt was a racially diverse culture, and skin color in artistic depictions was symbolic rather than accurate. Yellow ochre was used for women, red ochre for men, and black was often used to indicate fertile soil, the underworld, or both concepts combined. This symbolism is why Osiris, the god of the underworld, fertility, and agriculture, is usually painted black. It's sad to say that many white archaeologists simply refuse to believe that the black Nubians were capable of creating an advanced civilization, and many of their finer quality objects were first attributed to the Egyptians. Another important factor as to why the Egyptian culture rose to fame instead of the Nubian is the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone, with its inscriptions in ancient Greek and Egyptian hieroglyphics, meant that historians could translate and understand what the ancient Egyptians had written. While we do have writings from ancient Nubia, we have yet to find a way to translate them, meaning that everything we know about the Nubians comes from other cultures, so we often see them through the eyes of their enemies. The story of ancient Nubia has yet to reach the prominence it deserves. Still, as we strive to rectify the misconceptions of the past, we will shed more light on this mysterious and great civilization. Number 4. What did the Nubians call themselves? The name Nubia came into use during the Roman period, and historians are not entirely sure of its origins. Some claim it is linked to Nub, the ancient Egyptian word for gold, and others link it to Nubades, the Greek name for the people who moved to the region during the 4th century. The ancient Egyptians knew Nubia as Taseti, the land of the bow, due to the Nubians' excellence at archery. The ancient Greeks called them Aethiopes, from which we get our word Ethiopians. The Bible mentions the land of Cush, which is widely regarded to refer to the Nubian kingdom of Cush. However, the name they called themselves has been lost to history. This missing information is primarily due to the death of the Old Nubian language. The writings we have from ancient Nubia were written in Meroitic, and we have yet to decipher them. As the language is now extinct, much of the ancient Nubian history, including how they referred to and thought of themselves, is hidden in plain sight. We have access to many examples of Meroitic writings, believed to be funerary inscriptions, captions describing temple reliefs, graffiti left by pilgrims and travelers, fiscal records on potsherds, and even some lengthy memorial texts. However, this vast source of data has yet to be successfully translated. Perhaps at some point in the future, we will finally know the ancient Nubian history from the original people's perspective. Number 3. To what extent did Egypt colonize Nubia? In around 1550 BCE, Egypt conquered Nubia, attracted by its valuable trade routes and natural resources. However, the extent of Egyptian colonization has been a subject of debate. It was previously thought that the Egyptians sent in their own administrators to rule the Nubian people. However, genetic studies have proven this to be incorrect. Michelle Bouzon of the University of Alberta conducted examinations on the bodies of imperial officials found in symbolically marked tombs at the site of Tumbos. Previous archaeological finds suggested that the people were ethnically Egyptian, as the artifacts were determined to be Egyptian. However, Buzan found that while some of the bodies were of Egyptian descent, others were Nubian. Furthermore, there were two distinct types of burial. The Egyptians were found on their backs in small pyramids or tombs, and the Nubians were buried on a bed of cow skin in the fetal position. These findings suggest that local rulers were kept in place and were perhaps overseen by Egyptian officials. The study also proved that the Nubian officials still practiced traditional Nubian burials rather than being forced to adhere to Egyptian culture. Buzan also found evidence of intermarriage between the Nubians and the Egyptians. The study's results seemed to prove that Nubians still participated in the administration of Nubia, even when it was under Egyptian control. It also might suggest that the Egyptianization of Nubia was more consensual than previously thought. Although there were undoubtedly rebellions against Egypt during this time, perhaps the Egyptian culture was spread by fashion rather than force. Number 2. Was Egypt influenced by Nubia? Due to Nubian and Egyptian history being so intertwined, there are arguments about which civilization came first and who influenced whom. The accepted thought is that both societies developed independently and that the Egyptians were the first to create a culture based on kingship and the idea that the pharaoh was a god on earth. Egypt unified around 3100 BCE, and the first mention of Nubia was in Egyptian trade accounts in 2300 BCE. However, it is clear that Nubia was already a full-fledged civilization by this point. Dr. Emily Teeter asserts, Nubia was an important civilization in its own right, and not just a stepsister of Egypt. In assessing historical data, Dr. Teeter also noted that Egyptians considered themselves so incredibly superior to everyone else. It took years of filtering information to see what Nubians were really about, not just what Egyptians thought of them. We must look back into prehistory for more insight into who came first. Historians suggest it is likely that the Neolithic people of the Nile Valley came from Sudan and the Sahara. By the 5th century BCE, Saharan rock carvings suggest a cattle cult was thriving in the area that would later be known as Nubia. Megaliths discovered in the Nubian desert are considered one of the world's first astronomical devices. These megaliths predate Stonehenge by nearly 2,000 years. Archaeological evidence analyzed in the past 30 years identifies a Nubian civilization flourishing between Aswan and the Second Nile Cataract from 3800 to 3100 BCE. In 3100 BCE, the Nubians and Egyptians were trade partners and in close contact with each other. This new evidence also included the discovery of a stone incense burner found at a Nubian site. The incense burner was dated to around 3100 BCE and was engraved with a depiction of a seated ruler, a crown, and a falcon. These symbols would later become motifs of the Egyptian pharaohs. Dr. Bruce Williams and other scholars felt that this incense burner was evidence that the concept of kingship may have developed in Nubia at the same time or even earlier than it did in Egypt. However, new evidence from Abydos now suggests that the iconography appears earlier in Egypt. The debate on which culture came first continues and may never be conclusively proven. However, evidence seems to suggest that both cultures may have stemmed from the same source. Rather than one influencing or predating the other, perhaps they are just two sides of the same whole, and we are still affected by the Egyptians' apparent rivalry with their southern neighbors. Number 1. What Nubian history was lost to artificial flooding? In 1959, an embankment dam was proposed that would stretch across the Nile at Aswan. The biggest of its kind, the Aswan High Dam, would create a vast reservoir called Lake Nasser. The official reasons for constructing the dam were to generate hydroelectric power, regulate the Nile floods, and increase agriculture. However, there was one major issue. Lake Nasser would flood ancient Nubia. The building of the Aswan High Dam led to around 60,000 Nubians being displaced from their ancestral lands and caused the destruction of an unknown number of ancient Nubian relics. In the early 1960s, archaeologists worked tirelessly to save as much as possible. The temple at Abu Simbel was dismantled and moved to what would become the banks of Lake Nasser. Others were trying to rescue as many relics of the Nubian culture as they could. Dr. Nicholas Millett recalls, "The waters were coming up as we were still working, and my feet were getting wet. It is sad to imagine what may have been lost under the waters of Lake Nasser. More so, as Dr. Millet seemed on the verge of finding a sandstone tablet that held the key to deciphering the lost Meroitic writing system. The night before the flooding was to begin, Dr. Millet had uncovered a 2,000-year-old sandstone tablet near Ada that had funeral inscriptions in both Egyptian and Meroitic. Unfortunately, the tablet was incomplete, and the team was unable to find the other pieces before the rising waters engulfed the site. Who knows what other artifacts may lie beneath the waters of the Nasser? Other issues have arisen since the dam was built. The annual flooding of the Nile had previously enriched the soil downstream, which was then used as farmland. Stopping the floodwaters has reduced soil fertility in these areas, trapping the valuable nutrients in the reservoir. Also, as the reservoir traps water, it experiences a high rate of water loss due to evaporation, which is far from ideal in this arid region. Still, this has not deterred the dam builders, and a new dam on the Nile has been proposed. Should the Kajbar Dam be built, it will flood around 90 villages and destroy over 500 archaeological sites. Protesters argue that this is an attempt to further drown Nubian culture. However, despite ancient Egyptian propaganda, archaeological racism, and the systematic destruction of ancient Nubian sites, the Nubian culture refuses to fade into obscurity. With more focus on this fascinating culture, it may not be long before more mysteries of ancient Nubia come to light. How would you like to get a deeper understanding of history, impress your friends, and predict the future more accurately based on past events? If this sounds like something you might be into, then check out the brand new Captivating History Book Club by clicking the first link in the description. To learn more about ancient Nubia, check out our book, Ancient Nubia, a captivating guide to one of the earliest civilizations in Africa and African kingdoms, such as the kingdoms of Kerma and Kush. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. If you found the video captivating, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.